just to kick off, can you share a little bit about your background and how it led to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, my background kind of started in private equity, sort of investment accounting, and treasury. Um, so I guess I started in accounting, but my most of my background is really analytical and finance related. And I think I transitioned into being more of an operator during the downturn. The environment, economic environment, and the cultural environment in like a private equity firm during that time was pretty intense, and I had an opportunity to go to a counter-cyclical company, and I felt like that was a good option for me to kind of be able to really focus on one company and dig into more operational things. And I think in some sense that's true for me. I really enjoy being an operator and kind of having an impact on companies more directly. But most of my background is really kind of in large companies, like billion-dollar revenue companies. I did start my CFA charter when I worked in private equity, and I finished it some years later. I kind of got stuck on level 2 for a little bit, and took a couple years off, and then finished it later when I got married. I worked in real estate and I worked in public companies, but I think my more recent history is working with small companies, startups, scaling companies, and I kind of did that by going into California cannabis in 2019, and I went from a large company to effectively being CFO. I was the head of finance, or whatever you want to call it, but I ran the accounting and finance for a small company in cannabis in California, and I think that was just really like a mind-blowing experience for me. Just being in charge of everything, and building the plane while you're flying it, but also in an industry that things are very difficult, culturally very difficult, just logistically very difficult, and like practically like banking and all the things that kind of went with that was I don't know, it was a really kind of transformative experience for me, because I felt like I really got like beaten down quite a bit, and I sort of had to like build myself back up when I came out of it. And that really kind of led to me starting this company, which I don't know if I would have been able to do having not gone through that. Kind of coming from this place where you work on a very narrow sliver of things. I mean, I was running enterprise finance for like a $3 billion company, running leading the budget for multiple divisions and working with division finance leads and accounting teams and things like that. So it was really like slow moving big picture things, and then you kind of go into this like tornado, where you really have to make an impact quickly and start moving things quickly. So it just was a really changing dynamic of way of thinking. The amount of like stress I thought maybe I was under was a lot different. I think those big corporate environments are pretty casual for the most part. I mean, there are things that happen that are can be intense, but like on a daily basis, it's not like that. So I don't know. I think that's kind of generally my background. I mean, it's a lot of accounting, treasury, finance, a lot of analytics and Excel work. I did a lot of modeling, which I really enjoyed. And then I kind of was just really looking for more and pushed myself into this crazy cannabis world. And I guess I got what I asked for, that's for sure. I was working at Young's Market Company, which is an alcohol distributor, and I was getting recruited quite a bit. I would get a lot of phone calls from recruiters trying to bring people from the alcohol industry into cannabis, and there was a lot of money that had rushed in at that time, so they needed professionals to come in and kind of bring more structure, because it was a startup's hard enough, but like in this weird kind of like legacy medical hybrid transition, I think it was pretty chaotic. The regulations weren't very clear, but then they were very regulated. So they wanted people from regulated industries. Alcohol is sort of similar in that way, but no, I said no to a lot before I decided to go. And I mean, there were some other things that happened that kind of pushed me to that decision. I mean, I was working for some pretty high level executives from large, you know, um, corporations that had been brought into that company. So like, you know, Diageo and Dr. Pepper and kind of really large beverage company executives that I felt like I was really learning from. And when I ended up leaving, all of those people basically were gone. So I kind of felt like, well, I needed to make a move to keep on a path that I wanted to be on. And I don't know, eventually I got a call that I felt like made sense. And even though it probably didn't really work out the way I thought it would, but I thought it was sort of the best opportunity at the time to go after something that I was really hungry. Like I you know, and I wanted to find a situation that was going to give me a good opportunity to learn a lot. And I felt like that one was.
Amazing. Well, I'd love to hear what led you to start Basecamp.
Well, I think the pandemic sort of had a lot to do with it. A colleague of mine that I started a company with, we met at Young's Market Company, and we had always talked about like owning your own business. And his name's Ken Young. He's very entrepreneurial, always has an idea and a business plan, and like always is always thinking of things. And we had talked about like that we want to always do this. And we both kind of went into cannabis at the same time as well. So, you know, I came out of my first experience, and this is basically like the pandemic happened like 2 weeks later or something. Like it was very at the same time. So, you know, I'm trying to, maybe a month later, but I was trying to, you know, what's my next role? I don't know. I was doing some consulting through a recruiter, and then that project ended. And then the next project was going to come, and then they canceled it, and then they brought it back, and they canceled it, and like it was just like all this crazy swirl happening, and there was really no full-time roles for anyone. Like no one's going to hire, you know, a high-level finance person at that time, but their businesses were going through a lot of turmoil. So you had, you know, they're being shut off, and then the next month they're ramping up, and it, you know, the online boom sort of happened. So there's like this bullwhip effect on like inventory and cash flow. So I ended up just finding a lot of modeling projects. And I was consulting with Ken's company that he was working for. And, you know, I was trying to help them sell that company during that time, which was also insane. You know, there was a lot happening. There was a lot of like, you know, protests, and it just was a really like tumultuous time. And, you know, I don't think I ever would have like quit my job and start a company. I wasn't really in that mindset. But it sort of was like, I basically called Ken and I said, I want to start this. It's like, it's now or never kind of thing. Like the universe is basically creating a situation where we can do this. And I was already kind of consulting and in this sort of like, I don't know the right word I'm trying to think of, but like I was already in this sort of like ambiguous path of like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I need to keep making money. So I'm already taking like random projects and like doing, you know, random things. So that's basically what led us to start is, you know, I kind of called him up and I'm like, we should do this now. And he said, great, I have a brand, I have everything. He built the brand, he built the website for us. He kind of did all of that side of things. And I started trying to get clients kind of immediately while we were still trying to sell his company that he was working for. So we really kind of like formed the company in like the summer of 2020, but it really kind of got going towards Q4. We finally sold his company. He quit like the next day, basically, or resigned as an interim CEO. And then we kind of hit the ground running. So I really found that having him with me full time made a big difference. And we were able to really ramp up a lot quicker and replace our incomes pretty fast. I mean, within like 90 days, we were already looking for someone to come help us because we had too much work. So I don't know, it just sort of, it was something that was in the back of our minds. We had gone through these kind of crazy experiences. Our original thought was really like, well, we still want to see what's going on with cannabis, but we don't really want to work for one company. Let's work for like 10 companies, and then we can diversify our risk a little bit. But we ended up really kind of going into all the other brands that we loved. I mean, the other thing is we just really love working with brands. I love working with a company that I can like buy, wear, eat, drink, whatever. We love that, and we wanted to create a company that sort of reflected that. So we created like a consulting firm that's almost like a lifestyle brand in itself, that's kind of looks back at the brand that we want to work with. So it sort of just happened, and the universe felt like it pushed me towards it, and we just went with it, I guess. But we definitely took a big leap of faith to go after it.
Cool. You mentioned modeling and kind of how you help different brands. Can you share more about the most interesting or the most helpful things that Basecamp does for CPG brands?
I mean, there's a couple things really. One, I mean, accounting, I think there's this sort of accounting service push at the moment to really like leverage, technology and sort of commoditize accounting, especially like outsourced bookkeeping. And I think that sort of works at some level, like if you're early on, or you have a very simple business, like a service business or something that's not, huge or complicated, you can go with that type of approach. But I think CPG is really a lot more complicated. Most when it comes to the baseline accounting, most people are on QuickBooks Online, they're doing some sort of light manufacturing. They're like buying packaging or raw materials. They have a co-packer or a co-man, and then they get finished goods. So QuickBooks doesn't really handle that very well. So the inventory and cost of goods are usually a mess. And then omni-channel sales also, they have a tendency to, I don't know, basically, I think having really clean bookkeeping for CPG is difficult. So having somebody that knows how to handle it and you can trust your books. I hear a lot of people say when they end up signing up with us is, I have a bookkeeper, I have accounting, but I don't think I can trust my books. It doesn't make sense. Like the numbers don't make sense. And I don't have what I need to make decisions. So at some point, things start to ramp up quickly and go well. And then you need to have data to make quick decisions. And if you don't have that, I think that's one of the main things we really try to do is provide sort of a baseline of detailed and correct information so you can understand what's going on in your business. You understand the levers of your business. The other thing that happens that we do quite a bit of is financial modeling around essentially working capital and cash flow. So cash flowing and scaling CPG business is difficult. Most people need money, whether that's debt or equity. So a lot of the things we go through are, well, let's sort of like take a look at your business. We'll go through this exercise of modeling, which helps you understand all the strategic levers. Then we'll kind of basically get to a place where like, okay, here are your goals that you're projecting for whatever the next 3 years. In order to meet those goals, you need X amount of cash. But now that we know what the delta is, how are we going to get that? And what are the tools that we can use to get that? So that's kind of a more like on the CFO side. So we do the three main areas are, accounting, practical CFO, and then modeling. And they all kind of fit together. So once we start working with somebody, we tend to kind of run through that a little bit. Most people want to start with bookkeeping, and we end up sort of leaning in with CFO a little bit after that, and then end up doing some modeling eventually as well, just kind of naturally. So I think as you're trying to grow a CPG company, those are really the accounting, and then the forward-looking projections and the cash are all very, very, top of mind at all times.
Great. Can you tell me a little bit more about the timing of when consumer brands should start working with an accountant or bookkeeper? Is there like a good, better, best situation there?
I mean, from day one, in my opinion, you can start with cash basis if you're not really selling a lot initially, but once you start to sell, I would definitely go to accrual and have somebody that knows what they're doing. If you know what you're doing for a little while, it's fine. But at some point in the, very quickly, a founder doing accounting doesn't make sense. It's not the best use of their time. They end up spending a lot more time doing it than they should. And then there's always the question, is it right? Are you doing things correctly? So, I think the best approach would be to sign up with somebody that knows what they're doing with CPG as early as possible. But at minimum, once you start selling, I would definitely move towards that. And again, it's just not the best use of your time. Having the right information is critical, and having it, things done quickly and correctly is, I think, paramount.
I know Basecamp has a fractional CFO service. So when should brands consider hiring a fractional CFO instead of a full-time CFO?
Well, I think it sort of depends on the situation. There's the reason most brands would hire a fractional CFO is they can't really afford a full-time one. So somebody that's good, that knows what they're doing, there's sort of like, in my mind, sort of like two stages, right? There's somebody that maybe is like retired and doesn't necessarily need a salary, and maybe they'll work for equity, and they can be sort of a co-founder or a business partner in your business. I think that's an interesting approach, to have somebody that really is more like full-time and invested in what you're doing, but that's hard to find. And it's also just a matter of like fit. So who are the other founders, what kind of company? There's a lot of variables, right? So I think at some point, pretty early on, it really depends on, I guess, if you have current investors that can help you with strategic finance, or if you have someone on your team that understands enough to kind of get the ball rolling. But I would say, as early as you're thinking about raising capital, really, or if you're able to self-fund the company, you can probably wait a little bit, but really it depends on the capabilities of the founder. So if you need someone to help you figure out your cash flowing the business, how much capital, when to raise it, the understanding the profitability, the economics of the business, a strategic thought partner. So it could be, pre-revenue. I mean, I'm working with companies that are pre-revenue because they have a really strong like product mind, and they understand certain things really well, but they need someone to help them kind of think through all the other pieces. So it could be, in some cases as early as, day one. And I think it really comes down to what makes sense for the company and the person. If you feel like you're, I don't know, struggling making decisions, or just need someone to talk to with sort of like that financial mindset, it could be day one.
Thinking back on the last year, what was the most interesting evolution in CPG finance that you noticed in 2023?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me, which may have started a little bit earlier than the beginning of this last year, was there was I don't know, call it a 10-year ramp up of sort of CPG, like unicorn, I don't know, people trying to basically grow at all costs and exit as fast as possible. And there was a lot of money, similar to cannabis, 5, 6, 7 years ago, a lot of money rushing in, thinking, it's a sort of like a cash grab to ramp up brands, sell them to a strategic, and everyone's, going to retire early. I think that reality sort of shifted quite a bit in probably in 2022, but really in 2023, where the amount of money that was available was a lot less. It's a lot harder to get. You somehow need to be growing and be profitable at the same time, which for CPG, and especially like food, is very difficult. So I think the dynamic of like, I need all the revenue I can get to grow as fast as possible changed, where it was more like, well, what makes the most sense? What are my most profitable products and channels, and where should I be focusing my time and money? And I think that dynamic has continued into 2024, and I'm kind of curious to see how that will change. I read about these funds getting ready to come back in. I think there's a lot of money on the sideline, and I don't know. I think that dynamic of just really focusing on a path to profitability, it might even mean saying no to things. I mean, I've worked with brands that had opportunities to go into a retailer, but they literally would just lose money the whole time, and they just said no because it didn't make sense. They would go out of business. So I think that's really been the toughest dynamic in 2023, is how do you kind of survive on the cash you have. Get more in is a lot more difficult. People are spending a lot more time doing that. and then focusing on the most strategic and best ways to be selling their products. So it really comes down to like contribution margin, like gross margins, contribution margins, and that's again goes back to having good accounting. I mean, having accounting that you can actually understand. Like, sure, you have an idea of what it should be, but what is actually happening? And I think it's important to be measuring those results to make sure what you think is happening is actually happening. And then when you're going to, you have a finite amount of working capital, where am I going to use that and get the most return on it? There was also this pendulum of like everybody's like direct to consumer and e-commerce, and it sort of is coming back to more retail focused, but a brand that really grew 100% on direct to consumer going into retail is a really tough transition. The economics, the cash flow is a lot different. The chargebacks, the marketing fees, it's just a completely different animal. So I don't know. I think anyway, it's just in general it's a lot tougher, and yeah, you're right. People are a lot more discerning when they're making investments, and what are the trends are a little bit different, and it's more difficult.
What are some common red flags you see when you do financial reports or modeling for brands?
I think it really is just mistakes, or treating things incorrectly. Should something be in COGS or not being in cost of goods? A lot of times, the balance sheet can be kind of a black hole. There's accounts in there that people don't really understand what are in there, or things are not accounted for properly. So, inventory is always a problem, and cost of goods sold. Not having a tool, I think, having a really complex business that's scaled, into a few million of revenue, but not having an inventory tool can be a red flag, just because if someone that is part of that company that it's not super tight and very, very organized, that could be a very big mess. And there's like a lot of times there's some sort of hybrid of like cash and accrual happening, where some things are just being expensed or put on the balance sheet as they happen, and some are not. And so do you really have all of your liabilities on your balance sheet? Maybe not. Sometimes I think we've seen that where equipment is not fully accounted for properly, and there's a loan associated with equipment, but what they're doing is the loan payment on the equipment is actually going into like the fixed asset account, and there's all these kind of like funky things that could be happening. So I think the biggest red flag is just messy accounting, really, I guess, if you want to put it simply. So having to clean those things up sometimes can be a little stressful for the founder, because they're sort of realizing, well, maybe I've been making decisions on data that wasn't right, and now I think also that's a little bit of like, I think an ego thing of like, well, you kind of have to face the music a little bit of that it wasn't being done right, and you have to sort of admit that to yourself, I guess. So I mean that it tends to go back to accounting, and then I think from there, if you have tight like cash balances, that becomes pretty intense. Like a weekly cash flow forecast can be expensive for us to run for somebody relatively, but if you're really managing your cash, well, I don't know if expensive is the right word. It costs something, and if you're thinking about it, I'm trying to manage my cash tightly, but then I have to pay someone to build it and manage it for me. That could be the most valuable dollars that you're spending when it comes to just understanding the dynamics of your business. So yeah, I think one red flag is just to have someone's bank account constantly overdrafting. If they're all they're riding the knife's edge like that, that's definitely a red flag.
Looking back on all of the clients that you've helped at BASECAMP, what are some of the more memorable, or say the bigger challenges that you've fixed for clients?
Yeah, I think some of the things that we touched on are just like, when you come on to a new client, you're trying to close the books for the current month quickly and get efficient on like the ongoing business. But as you start working with someone, you tend to start finding things that aren't as obvious in their financials. So I think that can be challenging because you might say, oh, here are the things I recommend to clean up your financials. But then a month or two later, you find another thing that you didn't find the first time. So I think that's sort of a challenging situation sometimes where you don't know the full history of what's happened, or there might have been several people working on these books over time. So you can kind of see how things change from year to year. So it just, and then it becomes a question of like, well, is it really worth going back and doing a full cleanup on this? Or are we going to do, prior year adjustments in like January of this year? Or there's sort of like a dynamic of like cost and benefit to those things. I think that's really kind of the thing that I think about first. But, I think a capital raise can be challenging. Like, sometimes when you're new or, as a fractional resource, getting on an investor call can be challenging because you're not in the business every day. So I think it's that, to me, when those things go well, feel very rewarding and, get me excited about working with clients because I feel like I really have added value. If I get on the call with investors and the call goes well and they feel good about me being there and I'm helping the company, I think that's kind of a really challenging situation sometimes that can really prove your value. So I think, I feel like the topics we've touched on the whole time are basically all the same. It's really, like having the accounting part and then the working capital, raising money, helping somebody get like a line of credit or debt can be difficult because if you present books that aren't accurate, that's going to hurt their chances and opportunities. So I think kind of like making sure that you're providing sort of like that financial leadership so you can have all of these things presented well for your client, I think is, an overarching, challenging situation that, I think we really own every day.
So my last question is, what would your advice be to CPG companies for 2024 healthy financials?
I think kind of going back to some of the things we've talked about, really understanding the levers of your business, like where's your profitability coming from? Where's the best place to sell your products? So most profitable, turns the quickest. You don't want to be selling product that just sits on a shelf. You don't want to be buying inventory that just sits in your warehouse. So being kind of thinking about your cash cycle. So that kind of puts all of your working capital metrics into one. So, if you think about like if you're purchasing raw materials, you have AP, you want to extend that as long as you can. AR, you want to shorten that as much as you can. Inventory, days on hand, you want to make that as most efficient as you can. I don't think you can't really, I mean, there are companies that have really short production cycles that may not make things until they get an order, but you effectively want to shorten your cash conversion as much as you can or make it as positive as you can. So you have your working capital turning and then you're generating more cash flow in your business. So yeah, I think companies really have to take a hard look, kind of reduce risk. I guess it's really about reducing risk. So like taking a hard look at what they absolutely need, get on a path to profitability, make sure they have good information to make decisions. And then I think working on their cash flow cycle is also really important. I think when you get a big order from like a big retailer, it's really exciting. But then there's sort of this panic of like, well, how do I fund the inventory? And then they're not going to pay me for this like 60 days. So then, and then if it doesn't go well, I'm going to fall out. And then do you get another chance? So like you really have to be ready if you're going to make that kind of decision. One, to fund the inventory, fund some trade channel marketing, most likely to activate your product in a new account, and then make sure you can, withstand the delay in getting paid. So there's a lot of, I think it's basically the same topics that we talked about. Understanding the cash flow, I think, is probably like the biggest thing. for 2024.